Hi everyone, good evening. Welcome back to Project Chana Power Hour. Here's where we get together to learn and strengthen ourselves in special mitzvahs of the women, Kashrus, Shabbos, and Taras Mishpacha, as well as other halachos that are pertinent to women. And our goal each week is to prepare ourselves and our homes to welcome Mashiach. Tonight's learning is dedicated as a schos for Mushka Bas Miriam Chaya. May Hashem bench her and always begashmias and brachmias. If you would like to dedicate a class in honor of someone or in schos of someone, you can reach out to us via email, projectchanapowerhour@gmail.com. Please join us afterwards for tzedakah, tehillim, and a Mashiach thought, and we will get right into it. Okay, so for our first class in Kashrus, we will be continuing on our new topic from last week, which is the Kosher Consumer's Practical Shopper's Guide. We'll be exploring some great tips to help you shop for the best food, not just physically, but spiritually as well. We are grateful to have with us Rabbi Zibell back on our program. Rabbi Zibell is the Kashrus administrator at the RCF, the Rabbinate of Central Florida, and delivers classes to the general public on various Kashrus topics. He is also highly active in answering consumers' Kashrus questions on a daily basis. Rabbi Zibell is known for his practical grasp and application of Kashrus knowledge, as well as his clear way of explaining halachic matters. Thank you so much for being here with us tonight.
So this week we're going to be doing the Kosher Shopper's Guide Part 2. Just to quickly recap what we did last week. Last week we discussed the importance of being educated and looking out for details when shopping, even if one is shopping at a from kosher store. There's still many things to look out for and be careful, and especially if one is shopping at a non-kosher store, there's definitely a lot more to be careful with. This we also discussed that not to just eat whatever you see other people eat. That just because everyone shops somewhere, everyone eats something. That's definitely not something someone should base themselves on. In addition, the importance of having a Rav and a Kashrus expert that guides you in your Kashrus decisions, and the power of the shopper, that a kosher shopper ultimately in the Jewish store will definitely have the power, and when they express their opinion, they have a lot of way to influence. So this week we'll continue a little bit on that, and then we'll discuss possible things that can come up that can be problematic, even in a regular store that's from store. One thing I wanted to bring up, which happens very often, and I don't believe we touched on last week, is today it's more and more common for people to do online shopping, whether it's from Walmart or Amazon or from Instacart, and people shop based on pictures that they see online. So they zoom in and they see, oh, this has an OU, it has an Hashgacha, it's fine. But many times when the product comes to the door, it does not have Hashgacha, or sometimes it could be replaced. These shoppers have sometimes the right to replace, or even if you didn't give them the right to replace, they sometimes confuse. And many, many times the wrong products comes to the door, and therefore you have to be extra careful. Even if you saw a picture online with the OU, with the Hashgacha, you have to double check and triple check when it comes that it's actually that. There's been many instances, especially with places like Walmart, that they repackage things, so they don't have their own factory that produces, let's say, corn or chickpeas. They'll go whoever has available, and sometimes it's going to be a kosher factory and OU will be on the can, and sometimes it won't, and you have to always be alert. And sometimes terrible replacements can happen. Not too long ago, I was dealing with somebody that they bought the Bush's vegetarian beans. That's what they ordered, but ultimately the beans that came was pork and beans with mamash straight up pork in it. And with the rush Arab Shabbos, they didn't realize they were making chal. They just opened whatever came and used it. And they only realized at a later point, once people already had eaten and it had affected everything. The mamash had straight up treif in their chal just because something was replaced accidentally with the online shopping. So online shopping, you have to be extra careful and not just rely on the picture that you see, but actually check when it comes. So now we're going to go into what to look out for when shopping. So first things first, we discussed this at length in the series on eating out without a doubt, what it means a reliable hashgacha. What does a reliable hashgacha exactly mean? And we brought countless examples and discussed it at length. If someone wants more clarity on that, we can go over there. But briefly to recap, there's two aspects to hashgacha. There's the standard. Hashgacha could say we are keeping to a high standard. Everything by us is Pas Yisrael and Chalav Yisrael and Bishul Yisrael to the highest level and Yashan, and they could say all the standards they want. It's all nice on paper, but realistically, is that happening? Realistically, do they have the manpower? Do they have educated, proper mashgichim that know how to enforce all that? How is all this being implemented? You need very strong professional systems for this to actually happen. So standards is not enough. System is as well extremely important. And if you don't have a good system in place, even if Hashgacha claims to have a high standard, it means nothing, and you should stay far away. So first of all, we want to start with a reliable Hashgacha. Reliable Hashgacha means that it has a strong professional system and team to enforce all of its standards. So that's what we just generally, when someone asks, is hashgacha reliable hashgacha, that's what it means. It means that could this hashgacha actually follow up and do what it claims that it's doing? Now, the next thing is once you establish hashgacha is reliable, then you ask about the standards. Because you can have a strong hashgacha, but they don't always make something, they don't always certify Chalav Yisrael or Pas Yisrael. So what they're certifying is exactly what they expected. They know that they're not certifying Chalav Yisrael and they're doing everything is done according to that standard, but it's not always the high standards. And so other products, they may do Chalav Yisrael or Pas Yisrael. So then one needs to also know the standard of the Hashgacha. So both are important, especially someone who wants to be careful. But the foundation of Hashgacha being good is the system to make sure that it's a reliable Hashgacha. And then on top of that, you want to check and make sure that it matches your standard. And a person can have a personal family standard. For example, when it comes to Pesach, many families can have their own standards. And even during the year, some families may have their own things that they stay away from. It could be a community standard that Lubavitch only eats this and this, things Kosher at 212. And it could be other standards, whatever it is. All those standards, you may at times may have to look into it, especially if we're talking with a national hashgacha. National hashgacha means something like the OU or the OK, the Chav K, the Star K, the CRC Chicago. Some hashgachas like that, they're not claiming to do everything to the highest standard. They're trying to get as much kosher food available to the kosher consumer anywhere, wherever they may be holding in their Yiddishkeit. But they're strong in their system, so whatever they expected to happen is happening, but not always will that standard be a high standard, and therefore someone needs to look into it before eating. Is it going to be up to my standard or not? However, when you have good, reliable Haimish hashgachas, they are generally catering to someone's to a higher standard, to more Mahuder standard. So then somebody as well, even then, not always will a Haimish hashgacha be Yashan. And if someone personally is makbid on Yashan, for whatever reason, they have their reason why they want to keep Yashan. So not every Haimish hashgacha will keep that, because Chassidim in general have a tradition passed down from the Baal Shem Tov that we could rely on the opinion that was more lenient when it comes to Yashan. So that's just one example where even a Haimish hashgacha may not end up being the standard if someone has a personal reason why they want to be keeping, let's say, Yashan. So those again, strong system and standards, high standard according to the standards you want to be following. Now, just because something is a reliable hashgacha, that just means it has a strong system. That doesn't mean automatically as the highest standard. Haimish hashgacha, it's not enough that it's a Haimish hashgacha. You want to be a reliable Haimish hashgacha. If you have a reliable Haimish hashgacha, you pretty much have strong system and pretty high standards. Maybe not across the board, but generally pretty high standard. Now, then you have products that could be Mahuder. So sometimes a person may find certain products that are always certified, which will be Mahuder. And it's totally fine, and they could eat it because that product was done to a higher standard. Now, sometimes a person can be told that a hashgacha is a good hashgacha, and they should look out to make sure everything's to their standard. But they may not times may not know with lack of information. One may not know what to look out for. So the basics they know. They'll look out to make sure that it's Chalav Yisrael or Pas Yisrael. But there could be many, many more leniencies applied and many more things to look out for than just those two basic things that someone may be, or Bishul Yisrael. So we'll discuss that soon. All the details where things can, the standards can vary, and hashgachas could be using different leniencies, which may not specifically be to a higher standard. Now, at times, a person may be told that for such a product, it's fine. That could mean two things. It could mean that such a product is a very simple product, and therefore you don't need a strong hashgacha for it. Or it could mean that product was looked into, and there's a good system in place over there. And those two are very, very different. So at times you may be told that it's fine for this product. It doesn't mean right away that this product could always have a weak hashgacha. It could be we're talking about now with a weak hashgacha, something that a product that a weak hashgacha. Example, there was a certain guacamole that someone just asked about. It had a weak hashgacha, but they were told that for this product it's fine. From that, they derived that any guacamole can have a weak hashgacha, but that's not true. That product was looked into, and that product was fine, even though it had a weak hashgacha. But that doesn't mean that all products, all guacamole now could have a weak hashgacha. So we have to be careful as well when we're told information to make sure to properly understand it and to really get to clarity in it. Now, another very important factor is reading fine print. There was unfortunately a story that just happened a week and a half ago, maybe in South America, I believe in Guatemala. There was it's a long story. We're not going to get all the details, but ultimately there was meat being distributed and sold to stores and restaurants and others with a full-on, legit-looking label with hashgacha, big hashgacha, beautiful Hebrew letters, Heichal Lubavitch, Shchitas Lubavitch, and all the wording you want to hear and see on a hashgacha, and it looked 100% legit. And ultimately, it was discovered to actually be absolutely fake, and everything was treif. And unfortunately, many people were eating this product, which was absolutely not kosher. And how was it caught? Because somebody picked up that under the hashgacha in very small print, it said only with a hologram. Now, many people hear that, they don't know what hologram means. Hologram is a little shiny sticker that when you move it, it changes colors or it changes even dimensions, the hashgacha. And that is a unique thing that only the mashgiach has access to. And when they're doing a run, many hashgachas to make an extra precaution to make sure people know this is 100% without any that wasn't tampered. They'll have mashgiach put this on every single bag, on every single item going out. And this hashgacha only took responsibility if it was with a hologram, and the person noticed that this meat did not have a hologram on it. And at times that could be normal, because a meat when you free this was frozen meat. When it's getting frozen, sometimes the hologram sticker can fall off because of maybe there was a little wetness and it fell off. But the person was alerted and they looked into it, and ultimately they were able to come to the bottom of it. That it was actually absolutely fraud, and this meat was 100% treif, and a terrible, unfortunate story. So importance of also reading small fine print is very important, and it's especially common to have holograms by things that need extra attention, like wine or matzah or meat or even cheese productions. Some hashgachas will demand it. We'll share the screen to just show some pictures of holograms so that everyone could get an idea of what we're talking about. That is it working? I'm not sure. I'm not sure. Maybe I have an issue. 1 second. Again, it's disabled. I cannot share my screen. The host could change that. Otherwise, we'll just move on. We'll continue.
Good now.
Okay. So to quickly show a few examples. So here is one example. I'm not saying specifically this hashgacha is reliable, but just an example of a hologram which is put on a can to tell you that this was done with a special run with the mashgiach. Here's one that's put on a cheese. If you look here by the OU, on the bottom it says with attached hologram. It's only kosher if there's attached hologram, and this sticker right here. And each sticker has its own unique code. So you could even call the OU technically if you're not sure if the hologram is real and tell them the code, and they have records which stickers were used with which codes. That's the extent of how these holograms are used. Here's another one on meat, a bigger hologram. You could even scan with a QR code to see if it's legitimate or not. And here's just another one as well for examples. So just so that people get an idea what it is. Those are holograms, and sometimes the fine print will mention that, and we need to see it. Otherwise, it is a question if this item is actually kosher or not. Now, we mentioned the importance of having someone to ask questions to, and Baruch Hashem, there's many resources these days, WhatsApp groups with Rabbanim on there, which are ready to answer and help. But there's also important to know how to ask. Many times a question is asked, and the Rav may not know what the person is looking for, what standard they're trying to keep, how high of a level they want to be keeping. So answers may be more general. So if someone posts on a group and asks, "Is this a reliable hashgacha?" the answer may be given, "Yes, it's a reliable hashgacha." Now, does that automatically mean that it's muhoder or all the products in that hashgacha are on the highest level? No, it does not mean that. So if someone asks something more pointed, more specific, would be, is this hashgacha muhoder? Or questions that are a bit more pointed. If someone is trying to only keep the highest standard, that would be more of a pointed question to ask. Or if it's a specific product that you already know this hashgacha in general is not muhoder, but you want to know about this product, so a person can ask, is this product with the OU muhoder? Otherwise, just asking if it's reliable, the response will be, yeah, it is reliable, but it depends on, the standard really depends on what standard you're trying to keep. There could be various different answers that are given. One answer, which we said before, it said depends on that. Let's say fine for that product. That could mean two things. It could mean that product is simple, like we said, or it could mean that product was looked into. So we have to be careful with that when you're told that. Sometimes a reply could be that it's generally a good hashgacha, which that would be similar to saying it's a generally reliable hashgacha. That means not always will every product be on the highest level. And there could be hashgachas that are called case by case. Case by case means it depends on the case, depends on the product, depends on the other factors. So it's a 50-50. Really, it all depends on more details. And if you share more details, the person who's answering can maybe get more information and give you more of a precise answer. I will stop here for tonight.
Thank you so much, Rabbi Zibell. And thank you for the visuals. Okay. For our next class in halachos Shabbos, we're excited to continue our series on Amira Lenachri, part 13, where we discuss non-Jewish help on Shabbos, and this is going to be with Rabbi Braun. Rabbi Braun is the Mara D'Asra of Kern Heights, and we are very grateful to have him on our program tonight. Thank you so much for making time to be here. We appreciate it.
Okay, finally I was allowed to unmute myself. It's a good lesson in Avodas Hashem. Most of the time we have to try to be muted. Sometimes we have what to say. Before we start the share, I'm just going to point out something interesting. This happens to be the 13th class that we're having on Amira Lenachri. So you certainly might want to listen back to the previous 12 classes, because There's a lot you can learn from it, but we're just moving on. We're going to move forward, even though there's some people just came in tonight, but there's a lot you can learn from the previous classes. So I'll just sum up something that we said in previous classes, and that is that part of the rule of Hamidul Anachri is that when a guy does work for you on Shabbos, whether you told him or he did it on his own without you asking him, but he did it for you, you now have benefit from it on Shabbos, and including after Shabbos too, until the time called B'chdei Sheyasu, the time that it takes to do this work, until that time passes. And we're going to focus on that tonight, specifically on the idea of Hana, of having benefit from what a guy did. We'll talk more details about B'chdei Sheyasu, what that means, how you measure that, and we'll also talk about cases where you are allowed to benefit from what a guy does. So we spoke about all different types of specific halachos Hamidul Anachri. I want to focus on this topic specifically. Why is it that when a guy does work for you, you can have benefit after he did it, including after Shabbos as well? Because we're concerned that if you guy does something for you and you can enjoy the fruit of his labor, you might just go and tell him it's worth it. So the guy went and lit a candle. Hey, great. So now I'll just ask him to do that. And since you're not allowed to ask a guy to do things, so we made a rule that even if he does it on his own for you, you're stuck. When you wait the amount of time that it takes for the guy to do it after Shabbos, that means he really didn't benefit anything, because ultimately he didn't even save time. Because even after Shabbos, you still have to wait for the amount of time that it took to do this. Also, so number one, you haven't gained, and therefore there's no prohibition of having benefit. And also, you're not going to be tempted to do it in the future. Why would you want to do it? Sometimes you might want to do it in order to enjoy right after Shabbos. You don't have that temptation. Now, when it comes to defining that time, that's where the issue comes. I want to give you, it's not a very clear thing. What does it mean to define the time that it takes to go to do the work after Shabbos? So let's say the guy has to rip off, took a tomato and plucked it off the ground. Lit a candle. How long does it take to pluck a tomato off the ground? A second. How long does it take to light a candle? A second. Turn on the light? A second. So you can't have benefit from the light until a second after Shabbos. Is that what it is? Or maybe the amount of time that it took to go to get there. So if he went and he plucked a vegetable off the ground, well, he went to his vegetable patch, which is half an hour away from Crown Heights, plucked a tomato and brought it back for you. Is that how we measure it? Or maybe we measure not how long it took him, but how long would it take me? The vegetable patch happens to be closer to my house. So for me, it would take me literally 2 minutes. I just go to my backyard and I just pluck the tomatoes. I need to measure the 2 minutes after Shabbos. The Alter Rebbe makes it very, very clear how to define B'chdei Sheyasu. The word is Alter Rebbe. This Alter Rebbe is found in Hilchos Yom Tov. That the laws of Hamidul Anachri are spread around all over Shulchan Aruch, some in Hilchos Shabbos, some in Hilchos Yom Tov, and in each one of them in multiple places. But this Alter Rebbe mentions in the middle of Hilchos Yom Tov, and he says it's the amount of time B'chdei Sheyelech Hanachri that it takes for the guy to go l'makom shalika, to the place where he plucked his vegetable. Oitzad, Alter Rebbe gives another example where he captured an animal for you on Shabbos. So the amount of time that it takes him to go from his place to get there, finish a job, v'yachzor l'kan, and come back here. So if a guy came and a very nice guy, and he knows that you're having a Yom Tov meal, and he knows you would appreciate a nice, beautiful fish, and he went to catch some fish for you on Shabbos, Yom Tov. So he went to the sea, caught the fish, came back. All that time you have to wait after Shabbos. That's a lot of time. So it's not worth it. Now, when we measure B'chdei Sheyasu, the question is, there are people that want to say, if a guy brings something from outside of the Tchum Shabbos, maybe we shouldn't include Matzah Shabbos as part of the calculation at all, and we should start the waiting time on Sunday. And the reason is because people don't normally travel at night, especially distant places. To go travel out of the Tchum by night is not a time when people go on their horses, in the typical Shulchan Aruch example. So therefore, the concern is, maybe I'll tell the guy on Shabbos to do something, because I guess I can get it on Matzah Shabbos. Waiting the 2 hours on Matzah Shabbos is not going to accomplish anything, because nobody anyhow brings things on Matzah Shabbos. It's nighttime. So maybe people will be tempted to go tell a guy to do something on Shabbos, even if they don't enjoy it on Shabbos, and they'll wait 2 hours after Shabbos, because I can never get it on Matzah Shabbos anyway. Matzah Shabbos is not delivery time. A lot of stores don't deliver things at night after 5 p.m. So that's a strong argument. The Alter Rebbe says that when it comes to Shabbos, we should be strict and not include the Matzah Shabbos, assuming in a place where it's not normal to deliver things and send things on a Matzah Shabbos. But when it comes to Yom Tov, we can be lenient and wait only the amount of time after Yom Tov. Even when it comes to Shabbos, if you have guests, if you have a Sudas Mitzvah happening on Matzah Shabbos, and you waited that amount of time on Matzah Shabbos, you're okay. And all that we get from this entire story is there's no point in having a guy do malacha for you on Shabbos. You're not gaining anything. Besides that, you're not allowed to do it, but you also don't gain anything. Let's talk now about those cases where there's no prohibition to benefit. When a guy does work for himself, it's not a problem. I could benefit right away from when after he did it, if it's very clear that he did it for himself or he did it for other goyim and he didn't do it for a yid. So everything that we've been talking until is he's doing it for me. If he's doing it for himself, that's a whole different story. If he's doing it for a yid and for a guy, then you have to be machmer. Especially when you actually told him to do it, not he did it on his own. You actually went and told him to do it, and then you say, no, but he's doing it for himself. Obviously, if you told him, he's doing it for you. So he has two agendas, a Yiddish agenda and a Goyish agenda. So we have to be machmer, you cannot benefit from it. It could be if he would do it anyhow, that's a bit more lenient. A few weeks ago, we mentioned, several weeks ago, might have been already over almost 2 months ago, we mentioned a story of the Tzemach Tzedek, that all the candles went out on Shabbos, and the Tzemach Tzedek called the Mesharis, and he offered him some mashka. So the Mesharis walked in, and he lit the candle to take the mashka. He took the mashka, extinguished the candle, and walked right out. So then the Tzemach Tzedek saw that the guy extinguished the candle. So the Tzemach Tzedek offered him, you want another cup of mashka? And the Tzemach Tzedek said, come, I'll give it to you. The guy lit the candle. And the Tzemach Tzedek walked out of the room and gave him the mashka out of the room. That story the Rebbe brings in the Rebbe's personal diary. Now, that story has some difficulty because it seems like the guy lit the candle for Yid and for a guy. But the truth is that's not correct. He actually lit it only for himself. It's not as if the Tzemach Tzedek, the guy understood that there's an agenda here that the Tzemach Tzedek needs candles. It's not as if the Tzemach Tzedek told him, like some people do, oh, I would like to give you a cup of beer, but what can we do? It's dark. And the guy understands, okay, this is the way we talk. We have this riddle that we tell him, I'd love to give you beer, and what can you do that it's dark? No, the Tzemach Tzedek offered him a cup of mashka, and that's what he thought. How do I know that's what he thought? Because this foolish guy, as soon as he got his mashka, he extinguished the candles. So it was obvious that he didn't know that Tzemach Tzedek has an agenda over here. So the guy clearly did it for himself, and that's a whole different hazard. That's very, very different. So what's the reason when a guy does for himself that it's okay to have benefit? Because it's a milsa de l'shchicha. It's not a very common thing that a guy is doing it for himself. I'm not going to get anything out of it. So Chazal really don't decree on things that are not common. He's doing it for himself. It's like sometimes I get a side benefit, but Chazal will not gozer in such a case. So in a case where most of the people in the audience are goyim, we're assuming he's doing it for the goyim. If the guy doesn't know the yid at all, obviously he's not doing it for the yid. If the guy, even in the case where most of the people are Jewish, but the guy does something and right away starts using the thing that he did, you know that he did it for himself. And sometimes, even when most of the people are Jewish, but it's part of his job that he normally does, and it's obvious he's not doing it for you at all. So there are many ways that we can have clear indication that the guy's agenda was purely for himself. And based on the circumstances, you have to make that assessment. However, here comes a very important proviso. When we say that if a guy does it for himself, you can have benefit, that's only in a case where it's impossible to do this job extra for another person. Some jobs, it's one job for one job for many. The Rebbe once spoke about having 2 schools near each other, and the Rebbe said very often when it comes to school, all the admin stuff in the school can be done in a way of ner le'echad, ner le'meya. Ner le'echad, ner le'meya means when you light a candle for one person, it's a candle for one person, it's a candle for 100 people. It's the same amount. It's the same. Something happened to the Zoom here, or did not? No, I'm still here. It's the same amount of candles you need. It's one candle, and it can illuminate. It'll give light for one person or for 100 people. So the Rebbe spoke about schools. The Rebbe said admin stuff, very often grants, resources, the general stuff, not teaching in the classroom. Everybody could benefit from one general office, so it's a good idea to do it in a way that'll be ner le'echad, ner le'meya. Some things you need to add more for people. You know, you're putting up an urn, so if there's 5 people in the house, you fill up the urns a bit. If there's 100 people, you fill it up more. So whenever there's a concern, maybe the guy will add more for you. That's called Shemi Yarba B'Shvila. Whenever it's Shemi Yarba B'Shvila, the guy might add more for you. We don't say the guy did it for himself, because even if we know he did it for himself, but maybe he'll add more for you. So Chazal made a rule you cannot benefit from that. So how do we know that there's no concern that the guy will add more for you? Number one, he doesn't know who you are. He doesn't know who the Eid is, B'chal. He doesn't even know the Eid. So we're not worried that he's going to add something for the Eid. Or something which requires only one activity, is nothing to add. Like I said, I mentioned the candle. A guy lit a candle for himself. It's the same. He's not lighting another candle, so the person wants to benefit from the candle. Goes on to hate. A guy made a ramp for a boat. That's the common case in halacha. When there was a boat, when a boat docks, you need to get off the boat. They build a ramp. I mean, you're building a ramp. You build the same ramp for one person, for 100 people. So indeed, if most of the people on the boat are Jewish, we assume the guy did it for most of the people. But when a guy is building it for himself, he's not going to add anything extra. It's the same ramp. A practical case is sometimes there's a blackout, and the whole entire neighborhood is a blackout, and the electric company goes and relights and whatever, turns back on all the lights. So the goyim have to fix it, whether there's Yidden there or no Yidden there. And if they didn't do it for any Jewish people specifically, they did it because that's part of their job. And whether there'll be Jewish people living in the neighborhood or goyim living in the neighborhood, the company, the Con Edison, whoever it is going to make sure that his electricity supplied. So you'll not have benefit. I'm talking now about goyim. I'm not talking about when Jewish people put on, and that just it's a whole different kettle of fish. It's quite complicated with the fact because Yidden are doing malach on Shabbos. When a guy puts up does central heating, whether it's using gas or using electricity. So when the guy goes and for himself and he lit the central heating, and it's a house where most of the people that live there are goyim, or even if most of the people live there are Jews, but the guy has to do it whether there's Jews there or not, there's no concern of Shemi Yarbet. She's turned on the central heating was off, and he turned it on, and he was doing it because that's part of his job. Traveling on a boat. So you're allowed to technically travel on a boat even if the boat is traveling on Shabbos, assuming that the owner of the boat and the workers are all goyim. Now, there's a lot of malacha that has to happen on this boat, but the malacha will happen whether there's Yidden there or there's no Yidden there. The malachas will happen regardless, and therefore it's considered the guy is doing it for himself or for the goyim there. And there's no concern of Shema Yarba because the activities that you do on the boat, most activities, and we'll get to a moment of those things that are different, to run a boat on Shabbos or on Yom Tov, to be the captain, to make sure to work on the water, that the water should be filtered, all that kind of stuff. You do the same malacha regardless of how many people are there. Which brings me to the general topic of a Shabbos cruise. A Shabbos cruise, a cruise that goes over Shabbos or over Yom Tov is actually quite complicated in halacha, and even, by the way, a weekday cruise can be complicated. First of all, the halacha is you're not allowed to travel on a boat within 3 days to Shabbos. So that means starting from Tuesday night, you're not allowed to go on a cruise. I'm not talking if you're going like an hour a motorboating trip that they do in camp with little kids in day camp or overnight camp, whatever it is, speedboating, that kind of stuff. I'm talking about going on a cruise, which is a long trip. People come seasick, and Chazal made a rule, it takes away from Einik Shabbos, you can't go from a Tuesday night onwards. And the same thing will apply when it comes to a Yom Tov. 3 days before Yom Tov, you're not allowed to do this. That's problem number one with cruises. Problem number two, Kashrus is a big concern on a cruise, and when Shabbos comes into the equation, the Kashrus becomes much more complex. I know that's not my topic to talk about Kashrus, and maybe Rabbi Zibell could talk about cruises on some occasion, but it's a nightmare. In a cruise, you have to deal with so many people at so many given times, and there's no time in between to Kasher. It's like 1, 2, 3, you have to go. Things could come sealed, and who knows what. The Mechsholim are. There's one thing about a store, operating a store. There's another thing about operating a restaurant. There's another thing operating a company. There's another thing operating a hotel. There's another thing operating a Pesach hotel. And there's another thing operating a cruise. Each one is a whole different story. To take up the amount of mix-ups is endless shire, and they have to be mamish on the ball. It's almost impossible, even with good mashgichim, they have to be extremely vigilant to make sure everything is done properly. But the real problem is goyim are doing work for you. Oh, sure, we'll heat up your food. It's not that doing one job for everyone. The same on the plane, they serve you your meal. Is your name Mr. Goldstein? Sure, here's your meal. One time we'll heat it up for you. The guy is specifically heating it up for you, and he's doing it for you individually, as an individual. There's no heter for that. There's issues of bishul akum on cruises, specifically related to Shabbos. There's sinks and doors and bathrooms that operate automatically. And as soon as you walk in, the sink starts, you put your hand under the sink, you walk into the bathroom, it flushes, all that kind of stuff. There's issues of Tchum Shabbos. While you're on sea, it's not a problem. Once you dock, you can't walk out of the Tchum Shabbos, and you have to know how to measure that. And even if you walk just about, not out of the Tchum, just for a split second, when you come back, there's metal detectors, and security won't let you back onto the ship, which is another Shabbos issue. There's issues about lighting Shabbos candles. They won't let you light Shabbos candles, and they won't let you light Havdalah candles over there. That's another whole issue with the Shabbos or Yom Tov cruise. And there's another whole story altogether, which is related to Israeli cruises. The Rebbe made a major battle, literally a battle, in the early years of the Rebbe's Nasias about Israeli boats, Onias Yisraelis, how it's pure, outright Chil Shabbos. And people were arguing you could travel in a boat on entire Shabbos and it won't be a Chil Shabbos. The Rebbe said, I understand the mechanics, I understand, I'm an engineer, and I understand that it's impossible. Even today's day and age, there's no such thing as automatic. There's malacha that has to happen, and there's Yidden there, and it's malacha happening on Shabbos. It's a Jewish company, Jewish people doing malacha. Both are an issue. Either way, it's an issue. So what I was talking about till now about cruises, I was talking about Goyish companies. But there's a Kashrus agency that gives a hechsher, which the hechsher sometimes leaves a lot to be desired. But when it comes to Israeli boats, it's a whole different story. Let's go back onto topic. I'm going to go off topic completely. So I just mentioned that because we were talking about traveling on a boat, doing malacha for you on the boat. Sometimes they're doing the malacha regardless, and sometimes they do a specific malacha and they'll do an extra specific job for you, and you can't have enough from that. A newspaper. So a newspaper that's printed on Shabbos. A lot of newspapers are printed on Shabbos. Daily newspapers get printed on Shabbos. Now, assuming you're reading in the newspaper things that you're allowed to read on Shabbos. Let me go back a step. Assuming you're reading things that you're allowed to read even during the week, because some of the newspapers you're not allowed to read during the week also. Assuming it's all kosher material, if such a thing exists, and assuming it's Shabbos friendly section in the newspaper. I don't want to go into that topic. But it's printed on Shabbos. If most of the subscribers to this newspaper are non-Jewish people, so they're doing malacha for most of the people, which are goyim, not a problem. If it's an Israeli newspaper, that's a whole different story. If it's an Israeli newspaper that's being printed on Shabbos, a non-from newspaper, most of the subscribers are assuming are Jewish, even though sometimes the hashkafa that's there, it's much more goyish than goyish newspapers. That's another whole discussion. And there's no concern of Shema Yarba. Maybe they'll print extra copies for a Yid, because why? If they have the amount of subscribers they have, they print that amount of copies. A little bit extra, but whatever. So why don't I say that the guy is doing malacha for every subscriber? So the argument goes, there's an argument over here that even in such a case, what happens is I'm ordering my newspaper from a guy. But that's not the same guy that's printing the newspaper. So now we have what we call amira da amira. I ask a guy to do malacha for me. He asked another guy, because I went and called up my local store and asked him, I want to order, or my local company, I want to order the newspaper. He speaks to someone else and eventually gets to the guy that actually prints a newspaper. So that's one shvacha heter, but there's a bit of a heter there. The second heter is grama, because today's day and age, the way printing works is very, very different than ancient printing. There's not a lot of manual work involved, and it's sort of an indirect kind of malacha, and that makes it a bit more lenient. But a lot of poskim can say that you should not rely on these things, and specifically say to the people that you don't want your newspaper on Shabbos, especially if it's a newspaper that comes every single day. No, you don't want to deliver it on Shabbos. If the guy brings it, then it's a machlokes if you're allowed to read it or not, and it's best to refrain and not read it until after Shabbos. And really, what we should be spending on Shabbos on other things, not reading newspapers, but that's not the subject matter of this year. Hatzlacha Rabba and a gute Nacht.
Thank you so much, Rabbi Braun. It's very interesting. Thank you. Okay, for our next class, we are excited to continue on part 3 of our new topic of Birchas Hanehenin, Birchas before and after eating food. It's something we all encounter many times a day, and we can definitely use some clarity on that. We are very grateful to have back with us Rabbi Bell. Rabbi Bell is the Rav of Congregation Lubavitch in Montreal and the Dayan of based in Montreal. Thank you so much for making time to be here tonight.
Okay, thank you for the opportunity, teaching Shei B'nai Yisrael and Yonei Halacha. So we spent the first 2 classes speaking about the brachas on the 5 species of grain, hametzi and mezenes. There's a lot more to speak about, but since a lot of it involves mixtures of various things, for example, if somebody makes bread mixing together, let's say there's cornbread and they're mixing together flour from the 5 grains together with flour from kidneys, such as corn or rice or different gluten-free flours and things of this nature. It goes into the general category of laws of mixture, so we're going to leave that for a little bit later. Something else which we will come back to, as a Hashem, is that even when you're having something from the 5 grains, we say it'll be a meitzi if you make it into bread, or in other cases to make a mezanos when it's the normal way of preparation. And in general, it has gone through a certain amount of processing, whether being made into flour or at least split into smaller pieces. If one would have wheat berries or whole puffed wheat or something of this nature, it would change. But again, we're going to be discussing that in the context of other sorts of foods, what happens to them once they're crushed or cut or their tsura, their form, has been changed. So too, other sorts of mixtures, tarubas of different types of foods that have different brachas, and what happens when you put them in soup, things of this nature. We'll discuss that after we have some of the other brachas covered. I did want to mention one thing about the brachas that it says in Sfarim about brachas is a key to Avodas Hashem. We just now started Rambam, and the Rambam explains that Sefer Ava includes Hilchas Brachas, that through making brachas and constantly being reminded of the kindness of HaKadosh Baruch Hu and how He gives us our needs, it instills in a person Avos Hashem. Other places bring the idea of Hakaras Hatev, and this that we have Shara Bechina and Chavos Halavavis. He says in Shara B'tochen, everybody knows about Shara B'tochen for Chavos Halavavis, but he writes there that in order to have real B'tochen, you first need to fulfill the earlier Sha'arim that come before. So the Shara Bechina, where he speaks about recognizing the kindness of Hashem in all the brachas He gives, is a prerequisite to have proper Bechina. Only you are appreciating and recognizing the kindness that has been done and is constantly being delivered to us, can one have proper B'tochen. Okay, we're going to move on today to the brachas of Beri Priya Eitz and Beri Priya Adoma. In general, bracha Rishena, the bracha before eating, is different than bracha Achrena in many respects. One of them being you have to make a bracha Rishena, the bracha before eating, even on a tiny amount. Bracha Achrena is only if you hear me okay? The bracha Achrena is only if you've had the requisite amount, in general a kazayas. In addition, that in a case where one has no choice or one does not know, one has studied the laws of brachas and still is faced with a doubt as to which bracha can make. So the halacha is in such a case, if you didn't learn, then you're supposed to learn. But if you learned already, and let's just say you're faced with a machlikas paskim, so in that case, if you have another choice, you make a shahakol. And a shahakol, b'diavad, will cover all sorts of food after the fact. When it comes to bracha achrena, that's not the case. You can't just say a brain of fashis on something because you don't know what it is. So bracha rishena, in many cases, we have a case of doubt. And the proper thing to do is to ask a shaila what to do in a case of doubt. But b'diavad, we have cases where one bracha will cover another. So the Chachamim, when they establish the laws of brachas, only Birchas Hamazon is a mitzvah d'oraisa. When it comes to brachas, all of the brachas are by rabbinic enactment. And the Chachamim, when they made brachas and required us to thank Hashem and praise Hashem, wanted us to do this in such a manner that we recognize the specific type of food and make our bracha more specific to the type of food that we're eating. And therefore, if it's bread, it's the most chashuv, so it's ametzi. And so too among the drinks, the wine is the most, the highest status, so it has a separate bracha, berei priya gofen. And so too other types of foods, whether it's mezanos, and then it comes berei priya eitz. So although Brei Pri Adama is fruit which grows from the ground, and the tree is also growing from the ground, but nevertheless, if it's something which is growing on a tree, then you have to make an ha'etz. And if it's growing on the ground, you have to make an adama. The law is b'di'evet. If a person made a mistake and he thought the bracha on a certain item, he thought it was an adama, and he made an adama and he ate it, and then somebody said, "What are you doing?" It's a person ate a blueberry. So we say, the person made an adama, ate a blueberry. We say, "What are you doing? It's not an adama." And they say, "What do you mean? It's berries. It grows on a little bush. It doesn't grow on a tree." Well, halachically, the blueberries are growing on a tree. It's halachically a tree, and the bracha is ha'etz. The law is b'di'evet. If after the fact, if you already made the bracha on the blueberry, so then you already have covered your obligation. You cannot make the brei pira eitz. You can make a brei pira eitz on a different fruit if you didn't have it in mind. If you, okay, the laws of when you have in mind and not have in mind, depends whether it's in front of you, not in front of you. There's a whole complication there. In any case, so we need to know what is eitz, what is an adama, and it's not always so easy to tell. Especially, we don't live in an agricultural society, most of us, and we don't see the things growing, and they could be coming from the other side of the world. And even if it was growing in your backyard, that doesn't necessarily mean that you know the halachos. In fact, there's a machlekes about how we define a tree as far as the bracha brei pira eitz is concerned. And those that say that as long as you don't need to replant it every year, like wheat, you need to replant from the seeds every year. You have other sorts of growths that the roots, you don't need to replant them, but everything above the surface of the ground dies. So since it has a certain sense of permanence, does that take it out of the category of being something that you have to plant? And only that's an adama. We conclude, halachically speaking, we'll only make a eitz on something that not only the roots are existing from year to year, but the trunk is also stays alive from year to year. So although in the winter the apple trees are not giving any fruit anymore and all the leaves fall off, but nevertheless, if you'll scrape them, you'll see there's still green underneath inside the tree. It's still alive, and the whole tree does not have to come into existence again in order to give fruit. So you can have something, I gave an example before of blueberries, which it doesn't really look like a tree, it looks like a bush. And the bracha is going to be ha'etz, because the blueberry bush remains alive even in the non-growing season, where you can have others that look like a tree, like bananas, for example, though they might grow very high, papaya, nevertheless, even if they grow very, very high, the bracha is adama. Even on a banana, there's a machlekes haposkim. There are those that say a banana is taka eitz, and b'di'evet, if one made a eitz, one would not be able to make another bracha. But certainly, lachatchila, we make on banana, papaya, we make an adama, even though one might normally refer to them as fruits, and one would think that would make an eitz. Nevertheless, the bracha is adama. When it comes to berries, so strawberries, the strawberry bush dies from year to year, and therefore the bracha is an adama. There are some other less common berries, I won't go into them, that all could also be an adama. But in general, the other types of berries are ha'etz. Many of those berries, however, are infested with insects, and they're very problematic. And remember, the Alter Rebbe speaks about different types of berries, and he's giving Yiddish, Russian names for them. So I remember somebody had a shaila here once. They had a raspberry bush and wanted to know about the orla, about the first 3 years. So I went to Rabbi Handel Olav Shalom, and he says, "Yeah, do you remember the mulliness? It looks like this, and this is like this. All different types of berries with different halachas pertaining to them." Again, practically speaking, it's virtually impossible to eat raspberries today, because they're very, very highly infested. But in general, berries would be an eitz. We have another consideration, which is very important, which is, Alter Rebbe Paskin, there's a question here about Mega Shachionu. So actually, I'm not sure if that's included in Birchas Hanehenin. I wasn't really planning on speaking about it, but Alter Rebbe says that you can make an adama also. things that for a long period of time you don't make a shachion on a potato, but the fruits that are growing have a growing season. Again, the whole shachion question I don't want to go into because it's a very big shaila today. The whole shachion situation on fruits, because we have fruits the entire year, and this is coming from the southern hemisphere, the northern hemisphere, and how many growing seasons are there. So I'd rather not go into it. It's an important subject, but we'll leave that. Birchas Hanehenin itself is just getting the brachas. The Alter Rebbe has the din of shachion, he'll say the Birchas Hanehenin too. If we have time, we'll go into it. We have becoming more and more common today, hydroponic foods, and there the question is not a eitz or adama. The question is whether it's whether it's an adama or a shahakol. It seems that the prevailing opinion is that to make a shahakol because there's no adama. However, one should be aware that there are different types of hydroponic systems where they will be using adama. And there are many different, the way they grow things today, you have things starting from shtilim. It's very relevant regarding the laws of Shemitah, that they start things small and then they might start them off in earth, and later on they'll put it in a growing system that's not connected to the ground anymore to avoid the problem of Shemitah. But nevertheless, it originally started in the ground and it still has some earth connected to it sometimes. Things are being, especially trees, are being replanted. That's more of an orla issue than a brachas issue. But the world has changed in many ways, and even though the natural way things grow, it still happens. But there's often a lot of human intervention. So too sprouts, the alfalfa sprouts and bean sprouts and things of this nature. In general, although it looks like it's growing from a bean, and the bean was growing from the ground, but there are those that say that since it started from something, that if you ate that bean, it would be an adama. But since it's the sprout is growing, it seems to be the consensus they want to make a shahakol, although there are some that say to make an adama on it, but it seems the conclusion would be to make a shahakol. As I mentioned sprouts, I just want to mention something, which is, again, going back to the bread issue. There's different types of bread made from sprouted grain on the market, and people are under the misconception that the bracha on that would be a shahakol, because they're imagining taking sprouted wheat. They think the wheat sprouts look like alfalfa sprouts or mung bean sprouts, which are basically vegetation. And if you're chopping that up and making them into bread, how can you make a meitzi on that? But that's not how they make sprouted bread with sprouted grain. What they're doing is, when you have a bean and it first sprouts, we have the laws of Pesach, coming to Pesach soon, so when the wheat kernel becomes wet, so then it starts cracking, and then if you leave it longer, then eventually you'll get wheatgrass growing out of it. But when it first starts, it's a chemical change that causes the wheat to sprout, and that chemical change we call chimutz, but eventually that'll result in a growth. And what they do, they take it just at that stage, so it's still wheat kernels. So it's not resembling what we normally call sprouts. Sprouted grain that they're making bread out of is not what people would imagine are regular sprouts. So therefore, it ends up, according to the majority of poskim, being a meitzi. So once we determine how it grew, we're still not out of the woods, so to speak, yet. And that is, in order to attain its status of ha'etz or adama, has to be eaten in the normal way of consumption. So potatoes, we know, are an adama. However, if one would eat a raw potato, one would definitely not make an adama on it. The question whether one would make a bracha at all. If something is not food, then we don't make a shahakol on it. If somebody wants to, whatever reason, eat a piece of a desk. I was told once that there's there's a book of world records, and that there's somebody that once ate an automobile, and he ground it into powder and mixed it into his food, and over the course of years, I don't think he lived a long life, but anyway, you could eat anything. But if somebody decides to eat an automobile, you don't make a shahakol on it. Somebody wants to eat a piece of a desk, and there's wood. Somebody wants to eat a piece of wood. They don't make an eitz on it. There's no bracha for that. That is not food. If you have food which is edible, al yedei adchak, that if a person would be really stuck with nothing to eat, and then they would eat it. Now, would a person eat a raw potato? So there are people I've met that eat raw potatoes, not as a staple, perhaps, but in general, when it comes to hilchos brachas, as in many cases in halacha, we say bottle daita eitzel kol adam, that if a person has an individual way of doing things, that it doesn't have significance. Halachically, we go after the majority. What is the normal way of consumption? So, okay, potatoes. Are potatoes edible al yedei adchak? I don't think so. If they would be, if you have something which is edible al yedei adchak, let's take something which is more borderline, like zucchini. So you have today, they have these raw vegetable platters. I was once, I don't even recall which vegetable it was. A caterer put out something, and I asked him, I said, people eat this raw? He says, no, that's just a decoration. So I said, well, you should know people are eating it. So, they're putting out, I don't know, pineapple leaves and people are eating it. That's not food. So we don't make a bracha on that at all. If it's something which is edible, al yedei adchak, that it can be eaten with difficulty, so then we make a shahakal on it. So zucchini, it's clear that if the zucchini was cooked, we would make an adam on it. The normal way of consuming zucchini is cooked. Now, can one eat raw zucchini? Yes, and there are people that eat raw zucchini. Has it reached the point where that is considered to be a normal way of consumption? This might even change from one location to another or one generation to another. And if you open up the Gemara in the Shulchan Aruch, raw fish, one would not make any bracha on it at all because it's b'chal not edible. It's not meichel b'dei adam. Human beings don't eat raw fish. Today, human beings not only eat raw fish, they'll pay a lot of money for raw fish, depending on the type of raw fish. And certainly in years past, before sushi became kamata Jewish food, but if you lived in Japan, you would certainly make a bracha. That's the place where in that location, it's a regular meichel. So I'm not really sure about zucchini, but the question about zucchini is not whether you make a bracha or not. The question is, the raw zucchini, would you make on it a shahakal, or you would make on it an adam? If it's cooked, that's the normal way of having it. So to raw broccoli or something like that, broccoli is also a problem with insect infestation. But let's say one would eat only the stems after they're cleaned. So there are people that will eat raw broccoli. They'll see a vegetable platter and they'll put it in some dip and they'll eat it. Is that a normal way of consumption that most people would eat? I'm not really sure. When it comes to onions, so a large segment of the Jewish world makes a shahakal on raw onions because they say raw onions are not a food that is consumed like that. The Alter Rebbe pasuk in the Shulchan Aruch in the Siddur that the raw onions one makes an adama, and that is exactly what we do by the Seder when it comes karpas. And we need to make an adama, so take a raw onion. There are other minhagim too, but you can certainly take a raw onion and make an adama on it. Whether that's a cultural thing by the Russians or not about eating raw onions is another question. But certainly if you have something, chestnuts, if I'm not mistaken, one cannot eat chestnuts raw. They must be, I might be mistaken in that, but certainly the regular way of doing it is roasting the chestnuts or doing some other sort of preparation. You have plantains, which are similar to bananas, and as far as I know, they are also not consumed raw. One has to cook them or fry them or do something else, and they will only maintain their special status to emerge from the general category of shahakal to get their elevated status of adama or ha'etz if they are prepared in the manner in which they're normally consumed. The same thing applies, many people are unaware of this, to unripened fruit or underdeveloped fruit. If the fruit is not really edible, so there's a shaila whether you could make, let's say you have a fruit that's not ripe, and you're going to bite into it and find out whether it's ripe or not. You should better make an eitz on another fruit or cut it open and see whether it's ripe or not. Hopefully I made a note of it to speak about it sometime later about tasting. If one tastes something and spits it out, at what point you need to make a bracha. In general, if you taste something and spit it out, you don't make a bracha. There are cases that you do. We'll as Hashem speak about that, but that is a possibility to do in such a case, because if it's not edible, even al yedei adchak, even in a difficult situation, a pressing situation, it's not really edible, then it not only you can't make an eitz, you can't make a shahakal either. If it's still edible al yedei adchak, it's not so great, it's not fully ripe, so then it doesn't achieve, its status. So too, other parts of the fruit, let's say if someone is having orange peels or seeds, so if it's something which is normally the seeds are eaten, like pumpkin seeds or sunflower seeds, then we'll make an adama on them. But if it's something which is not normally consumed, the seeds are not normally consumed, then one would not make an adama on them. And so too, even though the orange, you could make a eitz on the orange, if one would eat just the peels, even if they're candied and made something edible, they would not have the status of eitz. They would be considered adama. Because again, just because it grew from a tree, it also grew from the ground. Okay, that's all for this week. Okay, we'll answer the questions, Bez Hashem, next week.
Thank you so much, Rabbi Bell. That was very, very informative. Thank you. Okay, before we conclude with Tehillah and Mashiach, we would like to take a moment to reach out to all of you, our listeners. If you enjoy these important and practical weekly classes, please consider partnering with us to keep them going. We rely on and we appreciate all contributions, any amount. You can log on to mikvah.org/donate and select the Project Chana Power Hour so that it can go towards this program. Thank you so much. All right, so we're going to go ahead, give some tzedakah. As always, grab that pushka and that coin, put it in the pushka, and we will go ahead and say a kapitel for Eretz Yisrael, kapitel chaf. And you can say along with me. Give it a second to come here on the screen for all of us, and then we will go right ahead. Thank you. Okay. Lam Natseach, Mizmer David, Yancha, Benai, Biamtsari, Sagav Hashem El Hayakit. Yesh Lachaz Recha Mikadesh, Mitzian Sadaka, Yeskar, Kamin Chasacha, Va'ilas Chaydash Nesala. Yitzanacha, Chalvacha, Vachalatzas Chaymal, Irana, Bishuasacha, Bishim Elhinu Nidgal, Yamali, and I come Shalisacha. Ati Daita Ki Hoshia, Adonai Mashiach Yanel, Mishmakacha, Begoris, Yesha Yiminai. Ila Varacha, Ve'ila Vasuzim, Vanachnu Mishim, Adonai Elhinu Nasker, Himakar, Vanafel, Vanachnu Kamnu, and Asaidat, Adonai, Hoshia, Melch Yaninu, Biam Karinu. Okay. And a Mashiach thought. This is from something, Sicha the Rebbe said, Shishan Parim Katan in the year Tavshin Daled, which is 1984. And that is that in the generation of Futzos and Mashiach, when we feel the darkness, there's darkness over the earth, so to speak, and there's a lot of strife and turmoil around us. And there are things around us that seem not good, which unfortunately, I think we could apply in certain ways to what we're seeing in the world at times. We have to respond with increasing and goodness and holiness. And it's interesting that the Rebbe says that at that time, which is in the 80s, this is a situation in which we find ourselves today, and that we must increase in holy matters and with great joy. And I think that's very apropos to the fact that we're now in Adar. And the Rebbe says there's another aspect to the emphasis on joy in our times. The Rama says, he who is of a good heart rejoices continually. Taiv, I think it's Taiv Liv Mishta Tamid, something like that. And he says Tamid, right? The Beis HaMikdash will speedily stand. Har Habayis will be established on the top of the mountains forever. This is hinting to the fact that increasing in the idea of Taiv Liv Mishta Tamid will hasten the fulfillment of that promise. I think it's making a connection between Tamid in that quote and the fact that we'll have the Beis HaMikdash Tamid. So we should have it speedily in our days. And ending off with just a couple quick reminders. If you appreciate the classes, do share them. Friends, family, anyone who you think would want to hear them. And you can find all playbacks on mikvah.org/power hour and also on podcast platforms. You can just search up Project Chana Power Hour. And if you have any questions on the classes, or you would like to dedicate a week of learning in honor of someone or Le'ila Nishma somebody, you could reach out to us via email, projectchanapowerhour@gmail.com. And lastly, thank you all so much for joining us. We'll see you again next week. And our learning prepare us in our homes and bring us all home every day to Eretz Yisrael with Mashiach. Now, have a good night. Thanks for joining.